Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, April. Is it only April 22nd? Is that right? I was trying to puzzle this out in the morning before I had looked at the calendar and said, it must be it's either April 23rd or 24th by now, isn't it? I don't know. I sort of had the feeling that, all right, well, I got it completely wrong. Unless I'm living in some sort of weird twilight zone or someone has swapped my computer for a fake one in an effort to fool me into not believing I'm living in the Matrix or something like that. All right. Well, I guess it's true. Earth Day. Ah, yeah, that's right. Is that always the 22nd? I'm very confused by this. I didn't look at the calendar this morning. I looked at, and I didn't look at anything this morning until I just looked up to see the date and timeline right here on the laptop that runs most of the things here. All right. Well, both it and the other computer agree that it's April 22nd. So we'll go with that. It's a theory. I'm not saying it's true. And I'm not saying I endorse it. I'm just saying this is the information I've been handed. This just in. Apparently, I don't know what day it is. Okay, well, Greg Dworkin knows what day it is. Justice knows what day it is. We all know what day it is. If you're running around getting ready for Passover, well, good. Congratulations. And maybe you'd like us to keep you company while doing that. We did a lot of prep and cooking yesterday, and that's good news. Begins at sundown, and okay. So it's a race to the big event, but the second half of the afternoon will be spent on prep for that, and then hey, Seder time. So all right, well, let's see. Plenty going on here and around the country. It is week 2 of TFG's trial, and of course, by the close of last week, everyone learned that we were absolutely 100% correct in predicting on this show and on social media that Trump, well, the prediction actually was that Trump would fart himself awake from one of his naps in the courtroom. And I don't think that has happened yet. Either he's too used to the sound and sensation, or sleeping too deeply, possibly, or doesn't care, or there just hasn't been an eruption powerful enough to shake him from his sleep. But reports have shifted from, yes, he's falling asleep, to actually I'm hearing, he's a little gassy. In fact, a lot gassy. And various reports had it that even the defense counsel were pretty upset. I thought this was a great opportunity for maybe the Irish odds makers online. Irish seem to have the corner on the market for like wacky betting. But I think America can come from behind and win on that one. But anyway, I thought it would be great to have a betting opportunity to see whether you could wager on whether or not he would wake himself up. But also I thought a good line for betting would be, who laughs when it happens? Does Trump himself laugh? That's actually a good question. Defense counsel, the judge, the jury, does it matter if any of them in particular laugh? Can you get dismissed from the jury for laughing? Maybe they need a larger alternate jury pool. I don't know. Anyway, that seems to be widespread and probably well-founded as well. And it also gives us another word to use for the F in TFG, right? We've had the former guy, the fascist guy, now the farting guy. And I'm happy to stick with that one. Greg has a collection of stories that actually matter, of course. But today is the beginning of the trial proper. The entire jury and alternates have been seated, and they are slated for opening arguments today. So that should be exciting and fun for those who want to do some real trial watching, even though the thing is not on television. There's hordes of reporters reporting way too much information, sitting in the overflow room, as they call it, and ready to report the most minute details, sometimes inappropriately. It's interesting how much detail they gave away with respect to the identities of the jurors, but how reluctant they've been in many cases, right up until Friday, to share information like, people in the courtroom do tell me I know it sounds like I'm making it up and trying to target him and poke fun at him at his lowest moment, which is fine, but people do tell me he's he's kind of farting a lot. And it's all right to say so. That's the truth. And something, and isn't it why you went into journalism? All right. We're not real sure about that one. but I am sure that it's highly likely that he's farting a lot. Greg Dworkin is here. He'll tell you, like, medically, it's just one of those things, highly statistically probable. Doesn't mean anything one way or another.
Well, it's your
funny.
Opportunity to try to use flatulence in your Wordle,
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. Right. There's lots of,
Too many
a lot
letters,
of
but
5-letter
that's the way it
words.
goes.
Farts.
And people have said the trial is starting soon at the corner of Fart and Pecker, but we don't know that for sure. The other question on the table is, does he float in the air like the uncle in Mary Poppins?
I have a theory that this is why he tilts forward when he stands. It's jet propulsion is what's pushing him forward.
But here's the thing.
Yes.
If it's true that he falls asleep.
Is true. Oh, right. Well, that is
If it's true.
I don't know, actually.
That he's flatulent, that he smells bad.
Yes.
That he's not in control of himself. It doesn't matter whether the pundits report on this or not. Do you know who's going to know this totally unfiltered? The jury.
Oh, yes.
They're there in a locked room in a New York courtroom, which already smells bad.
Yes, I believe they call it the hot box.
And
I'm not sure about that.
Well, actually, it's the freezer.
The Dutch oven. Okay. Well, yeah, they're keeping it cold. For various reasons, including hopefully the defendant will stop falling asleep. But but he's heating it up good. Well, it's greenhouse gas.
As I understand it, what happens today is opening statements.
Yeah.
And the Trump defense is going to be, this is a hush money trial, which is stupid. Leave us alone. It's none of your business. Mm-hmm. And the prosecutor is going to say, no, it's a cover-up trial. You're trying to cover up the fact that you were trying to influence the election. Yes. And the hush money payments was part of the deal, but that's not the crime. Right.
Also, I have to cover up my nose as well.
So I don't know how long that takes. I don't know how long-winded they're going to be.
What?
I have to mention there's been a tremendous number of stories about greenhouse gas emissions in my Twitter feed today, which is really unfortunate.
It's Earth Day.
But it's Earth Day, right?
Yeah,
so,
that's what the reason is.
So that's the reason. But I don't know whether David Pecker's going to testify today or tomorrow. Probably tomorrow. I think the trial is going to be cut short a little bit as well because of Passover.
Maybe.
So I think they go till like 2 or 3 o'clock today.
Passing everything.
Probably 2, and then again tomorrow, and then they have Wednesday off anyway. But it's Passover, so I don't know when the trial starts again. So we'll have to get some of this information here. Today's opening statements, that's all I can say for sure.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, it's a good thing that...
And if Trump smells, really, honestly, the jury's going to know it.
That's true, and they're not going to be able to avoid it. Trump himself... Ivanka is Jewish in having converted on...
She is now, yeah.
Yeah, Jared. Now, Trump is not, so he doesn't have to eat matzah all week, which is also not great, gastrointestinally, generally speaking. But I think we'll be spared from the worst of that. But yeah, your Jewish friends may have that. There's hard-boiled eggs. There's matzah. There's horseradish. I don't know if horseradish really produces any gas, but anyway, it's a rough week for a lot of people. So maybe there may be other jurors who are willing to blame it on other people. We don't know.
Maybe.
We will have to see. And I'm just interested to see how comfortable reporters get with this. I don't think Maggie Haberman has broken her silence on that one yet, even though... well, again, that too. Breaking news.
Breaking. I mean, are these fart references?
It goes on forever. You'd think I'd planned it, but it's just really the prevalent place that farting holds in our society. That's all. It's not my fault.
So let's go over some real news here.
All right.
I mean, the trial is enormous. I think it's enormously important and underplayed. And we will talk about Congress. But here's the Atlantic. You simply can't avoid references. Keep your mind out of the cover.
Why would
it's
you?
hard. I mean, here's David Frum with a very serious topic here. Right? Trump deflates. It wasn't just Putin who lost in the House vote on Ukraine aid.
Yeah.
Oh, you
the
thought
actual
he was
Putin.
talking about farting.
Yeah. No, okay. The actual guy, Putin. Yes, okay.
Ukraine won. Trump lost. The House vote to aid Ukraine renews hope that Ukraine can still win its war. And it also showed how and why Donald Trump should lose the 2024 election. In other words, people in the Republican Party who happen to be House members just had enough, and they voted with the Democrats.
All right.
And that's how the election should go, too.
I'm for that.
Right? And so for a long time,
yes,
the line was, LOL, nothing matters. And now, as of this morning, everything matters.
All right. Even
everything matters. Everything's important, you know. And look at how finally they got to the breaking point, and Mike Johnson became a mensch, and look what he did, and he's wonderful.
No, that didn't happen.
Mensch is a good thing. And so you know,
right.
All of a sudden, Mike Johnson showed courage and this and that and everything. You know, look, it's the same party. And the funny thing is how the infighting within the Republican Party has just broken out into the public. Here's this is from the Pundit Roundup. This is a Burgess Everett tweet.
Okay.
GOP Representative Tony Gonzalez, not mincing words on CNN, as he predicts Mike Johnson will survive the motion to vacate. This is a quote.
Yeah.
I serve with some real scumbags.
Wow. All right.
Or Gonzalez. Look, Matt Gaetz, he paid minors to have sex with him at drug parties. Bob Good endorsed my opponent, a known neo-Nazi. These people used to walk around with white hoods at night. Now they're walking around with white hoods in the daytime. These are the Republicans.
Yeah. Well, they're walking around with member pins.
Out in the open.
Yes.
Savaging each other.
That was a gratuitous addition.
Let them fight.
Bob Good. That's nice. Yeah, right. Also, everybody hates murdery Trader Greene, and that's also good news.
Well, that's the other thing. You know, so what happened, it was such a good week for Democrats and such a bad week for Republicans.
Right.
But again, you have to be reminded of the old, end of movie MASH scene, where Hot Lips Houlihan, is just totally upset with everything and goes to Colonel Blake and says, "If you don't fix all this, I'll resign my commission." And Blake says, "Resign your damn commission. Who cares?" That's Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's been threatening this motion to vacate. Then she says, "I'm bringing it up." And the Republicans look at her and say, "So what?
Yeah.
You don't have the votes." Now this is a procedural
She forgot
thing.
how it worked.
Okay. And so I need to be corrected by you on all of this because I never remember the exact details. But currently, I think the Republicans have 218 members and the Democrats have 213. And it's about to be 217 to 213.
Okay.
And the reason that matters is because if one actually sets up a privileged motion to vacate requiring the speaker to schedule a vote within 48 hours, and I'm not even going to get into how you define 48 hours because legislatively that could be a month and a half. But once you have that vote, I think it's a majority.
Yeah.
So, you either vacate or you don't vacate.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a majority to vacate.
Yes.
And there is no possible way with GOP infighting like this that there's going to be a majority vote to vacate.
Not without
Democrats. Not without Democrats.
Yeah.
Right? So Democrats have a variety of things they can do. They can vote present.
Yes.
They can leave that vote for the end and see what happens and whether or not there's a majority of the majority, which is hardly a majority. Certainly not a functional majority. But the point is, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't have the votes to get rid of Mike Johnson. And if she doesn't have the votes, what's her posturing for? What's it all about? The rest of the Republicans just turn your back and say, "I don't really care if you resign your commission." So what?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who would like to see her gone.
That was hanging over, it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, she never understood why it worked the first time. But I imagine she figured, well, Matt Gaetz says he engineered this thing, and I'm easily as stupid as Matt Gaetz, so I can make the same thing work. She just didn't understand. It was a very unique situation with McCarthy. Right. And you could reproduce it, certainly, with Johnson, but not her. She can't put
that's
a
the
coalition
interesting thing
together
as well.
Like not that Gaetz could either, but
yeah, you can look at numbers and you can talk about procedure, but just like in the Senate, in this clubby atmosphere here, it all comes down to personality.
Yeah, she really does not have that. Not that
she
Gaetz
doesn't
did.
have that, but what I'm saying is the reason Kevin McCarthy was doomed, and it wasn't over Ukraine. Kevin McCarthy was doomed over a spending bill.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Well, they're all spending bills.
Yeah, they are.
But yes.
It was a generic
routine
budget bill.
Yeah.
And
honestly,
the reason that Kevin McCarthy was doomed is because Democrats loathed him.
Yes. With
the force of 1,000 supernovas. And Republicans don't understand this. They don't. They say, well, what's the difference between McCarthy and Johnson? You know, how can you trust Democrats to do something? If only Democrats had protected McCarthy. There was no way Democrats were going to protect McCarthy. They loathed him. He was a turncoat and traitor to the United States on January 6th. He lied to their faces. He never tried to make a deal with them. He never talked to them. All he did is insult them. Why in the world would Democrats lift a finger to help him? Johnson's different. He is a committed ideologue, but the Democrats who deal with him, including Hakeem Jeffries, who's played this beautifully, by the way, have said, you know, he's a straight shooter. If he says something, you can trust him.
Well, that will make.
You
a
may
difference.
not like what he says, but you could trust him. McCarthy, you couldn't
I don't know
trust
if I could
at
make that
all.
judgment
and
about
so
him.
that's why personalities come into this. They are just two different people in two different circumstances, nothing alike, and you can't look to see what happened to McCarthy and say, well, the same thing's going to happen to Johnson. No, it won't.
No. That's a misjudgment, and you're right to focus it on McCarthy there. It isn't really so much a difference between. It had nothing to do with the abilities or disabilities of Matt Gaetz versus Marjorie Taylor Greene. It wasn't really organized by them per se. They threw a fit, and someone else showed up at the McCarthy fit, and they didn't show up at the Johnson fit. Why not? So really, yeah, you're right. Exactly. It's about those two targets, not about who was organizing the shot at them. So. Important difference. And also, you know, I mean, it may be that eventually people do loathe Mike Johnson in the same way, but it hasn't been long enough. And
not after the Ukraine vote.
Yeah, there hasn't been.
He's won enough goodwill with that I just
that
don't
may
see
take a while to get there. And again, like you said, they come out of it. I don't like what you did about other things, perhaps, but you said you were going to hold this vote, and you did. Whereas McCarthy would have pulled the rug out a couple of times.
You said, well, we're going to change it up. We're going to do something else.
So, yeah, you're right. He was just he didn't understand what kept him in that position. Johnson may not either. He just hasn't bungled his way into making himself
the other thing is Kevin
yet.
McCarthy understood what got him in that position, which is to say, I'll give away anything so long as you vote for me. The trouble is
that's going to work.
Democrats recognized what got him in that position. Which is to say, I'll give away anything in order to keep my seat. And Democrats said, we can't work with somebody like that.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's true. Okay. Well done. Good analysis. And,
so there's that. Now, it's to add to their bad week, and we talked about this on the show on Thursday. This is also last week, the week that the Republicans screwed up the Mayorkas impeachment.
Yes.
So it was just a really bad week for them.
Yeah. And their president was on trial.
And what it was a bad week for is MAGA Republican stunts, as
everybody calls
Jennifer
them?
Rubin put it.
Okay.
A rotten week for MAGA Republicans' feeble stunts.
Okay.
Because the impeachment failed. The Biden impeachment is going nowhere. They keep trying to go with these stupid sound clips of Biden crime family and this, that, and everything else. You know, how's that going for him? I'll tell you how that's going for him. Here's the Marist poll today. Biden +3 head-to-head on Trump, +5 with third-party candidates included, +7 with those who say they're definitely voting. And here's another line from the Marist poll. Among those who have an unfavorable opinion of both candidates, Biden 50% and Trump 48% are competitive. Trump previously had a 15 percentage point advantage with these voters. 54-39. So this is just one of many polls showing close race, Biden making strides, and now comes the Trump trial. It's just a terrible week for them when you add everything together. Yeah. And so the pundits who say, well, everything matters. Yeah, everything does matter. And so it all comes together. That's why I wanted to give that preview before I do this Slate article, which I thought was really good. Dahlia Lithwick and Anat Shenker-Osario.
Well, that sounds good.
The Trump trial, well, actually, Anat won my heart because her Twitter handle is Anatosaurus. I mean, it's just wonderful. But Dahlia Lithwick and Anat write, the Trump trial is already influencing public opinion. Pundits are reading these shifts completely wrong. It's exactly the kind of movement that could determine the election. In other words, the lawyers, as you know,
yes,
big legal, steps back and say, well, this is the worst of the 4 cases. And I don't know how sound it is. It's a novel legal theory. It's a hush money case. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It is a
cover-up.
They
did get that wrong.
And the cover-up is worse than the crime. In fact, you don't even have to prove a crime here. You just have to prove there was intent to create a crime.
Well, there's always that.
But you don't have to prove that the crime happened. You know,
well, that's
again,
a perfect case.
We've used this analogy before, but this is the guy in the getaway car. You drive up to the bank, and everybody in the back seat is planning on committing a crime, and you get busted.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't commit a crime. We didn't rob the bank. Well, you were standing there with guns and masks, and we caught you. And you don't have to have succeeded in taking money out of the vault for us to accuse you of doing something wrong. You don't have to prove that the cover-up of paying hush money to Stormy Daniels was used to foster another crime by proving a crime was committed. All you have to show is that we paid the hush money with the intent of committing a crime, which is election fraud.
Yeah.
We don't have to prove election fraud happened, just that was our intent.
It did.
And so Dahlia Lithwick and Anat say, it's not just the lawyers. The pundits are also certain they know how the public will think about a trial that's barely begun.
That seems
That's
fair.
like criticizing reporters for, doing stuff they haven't reported on yet, or declaring that you know something before you have the facts. You can't do that. They write, they're sure they understand how will it affect a vote that remains 200 days away, and they're bringing in survey data to back up their claims. ABC News declared, the polls suggest a guilty verdict would be unlikely to have a big influence come November, citing as evidence the fact that just 35% of independents and just 14% of Republicans believe Trump is guilty.
Well, okay, that's initially misreading the
just take it at face value. Take it at literal value.
Yeah.
If you lose 35% of independents and you lose 14% of Republicans in a tied race, you lose.
Okay. Yes, or in fact, I know we have, there was the wrong, sir. You lose. Good day, I think. You have to say good day, sir, after you lose. Thank you.
As further proof that Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's efforts are going to be electorally inconsequential, they go on to reference a Quinnipiac poll showing only 29% of voters would be less likely to support Trump upon conviction in this criminal trial. Now, yes, these are numbers. Yes, the numbers are less than 50%.
They are numbers.
Yes, we've been told many, many times, they write, that it takes that +1 to win an election. But you don't understand how elections work. Because for Trump to lose this election, it doesn't require over 50% of people to say this trial will flip their vote. Many people are already going to not vote for him. And so as in 2016 and 2020, the 2024 election will come down to margins of 1 or 2% in just 6 states. And in this game of winner takes all, dropping only 9% of your base under a Bragg conviction means you lose.
Yeah, all right. That's a good point. And it's actually necessary to remind everybody, you don't have to get 50% of Republicans to say they'll change their vote based on
this isn't the House. You don't need a majority of the majority or whatever.
There's already 50% of the country out there saying, I won't vote for him. I wouldn't vote for him if they not only said he wasn't guilty, but they made him the judge. I
wouldn't vote for him if he wasn't flatulent.
Right. Although that does make me sympathetic. But that doesn't mean I'm going to vote for him. The question is, for people who are entertaining the idea, either are definitely going to vote for him or are just thinking about it. What about them? Because that's what we need to measure.
So these authors write, so those who are dismissing the electoral consequences of this criminal trial by declaring events in Manhattan over the next few weeks will merely animate Trump's base.
Oh, is that a farting reference?
are also demonstrating a fundamental misunderstanding of electoral math. You can't mobilize the voters who are already absolutely voting for Trump. No matter how rabid their fury, how bottomless their sense of grievance, they only get one vote unless they're going to do the same kind of election fraud that they love to decry.
They do try and do that quite a lot.
It can't be any more impactful, right? The House Freedom Caucus doesn't get bigger because they're louder.
No, though that's their goal. That's the idea, to make people think that.
Right. And so that's why all this stuff that happened exposed it all and why it was so wonderful.
Right.
It was wonderful that Ukraine gets the money. It was wonderful that the big winner was Joe Biden, as Punchbowl says this morning.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah,
but,
that's helpful.
What was really wonderful is taking the clause declawing Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yes.
That's really the important part of all of this.
That was terrific.
And then the authors go on to say, it's important to remember, this is really an election interference trial with a trifecta of sex, money, and voter deception. So, the public opinion data is one way to understand the influence, and it all points to it being quite consequential for the reasons stated. But the larger, unquantifiable element is the story it transmits. That's why narrative is so important. The trial is a long-awaited step toward accountability for a presidential candidate publicly performing the role of criminal defendant, sitting reluctantly before a jury of other Americans, having to take directions from the judge, not being the most powerful man in the room. A lot of this is stuff I'm adding. It's all important because it's all part of his persona. He can't order a hamburger and get his Diet Cokes and have a Hope Hicks whisper in his ear, "You're wonderful. I just have a whole printout of all these wonderful things people just said because they want your pardon," or whatever.
Yes. Not her job.
He's cut off from all of that for weeks. Weeks.
Yeah, and forced, I think, maybe for the first time, to actually confront the vitriol against him directly as they read those mean tweets. It was terrific. No wonder his stomach is so upset. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're supposed to be officially done with Trump farting references, but I just see them everywhere we turn. Doesn't matter. That's just going to be me for the next couple of days.
Hard not to. So we're going to bounce between trial and Congress because they're all tied together as part of the GOP's really bad week, and Congress is not in session. So they're on recess.
Yes.
And they're on recess, as Marjorie Taylor Greene says. So we can go back and find out what our constituents really want. And that's why I'm sure there'll be a motion to vacate when we get back. And she's still not going to have the votes.
Nope. Also, there's phones. They can tell you what they think now. I'm sure she'll rally support for it in her weird district, but, the issue is rallying support for it in other districts, and that's not happening.
Always been the case. And so, again, some of these are Biden districts, and with Biden starting to take a lead in some of the polls, that's going to be harder and harder for her to do. So this is from the New Republic, which has now relabeled itself as TNR.
Oh, yeah? Like KFC.
Yeah. So Trump's rage at hush money trial is already backfiring on him. This is a podcast by Greg Sargent, and he references the Dahlia article I was reading from.
Yeah, okay.
And he writes, Trump's rage at hush money trial is already backfiring on him, with arguments beginning this week in Donald Trump's trial. An analyst explains how the proceedings are already making him look sad and trapped and small.
Not smell. Small.
Small.
Right.
And he interviews Anatosaurus. and says there's no reason to think Trump's trial helps him outside his MAGA base. He's not the alpha. He's falling asleep. He's subjected to censure, says a nut. He looks small, and his contempt for the law alienates swing voters. So none of this is going to turn out to be good for him.
Well, that's fine. It's not supposed to be. Usually when you're on trial, it's bad.
Right. And that's the case here. And so those rules of gravity really are not going to change. So flipping back to the Atlantic article, David Frum, where he writes Trump deflates, he talks about the fact that on aid to Ukraine, Trump got his way for 16 months. When Democrats held the majority of the House in 2022, they approved 4 separate aid requests for Ukraine, totaling $74 billion. As soon as Trump's party took control of the House, it stopped. Mm-hmm. Now they're going to get 60 in one swell foop.
Okay.
At the beginning of this year, Trump was even able to blow up the toughest immigration bill seen in decades just to deny Joe Biden a bipartisan win. And that's the thing. It's been so obvious that their whole shtick is, I don't care if it's good for America or not. The really important thing is Biden doesn't get to declare a W.
Right.
And that's why it was so interesting that Punchbowl said today the big winner is Joe Biden.
Okay.
And what they write is House Republicans came into the 118th Congress with big plans.
All right.
That's like big appliance, right? They were going to cut taxes and spending, impeach Biden and members of his cabinet, and use their leverage to force Democrats to accept stringent border security and immigration policies. In short, they're going to shake up Washington, and Biden was their main focus, and that didn't happen. Instead, Biden's pretty much got everything he asked for from this Congress without having to concede much. It's taken a while. Yet in the end, Biden has emerged as the big winner on government funding, on FISA, now on Ukraine and Israel. Biden got what he wanted. Yeah, there's been the Hunter and James Biden stuff, but House Republicans paid a much higher price due to their internal discord and dissension. GOP lawmakers have ousted one speaker while another may be forced to turn to Democrats to remain in power, and it gets worse from there, and I'm not even sure it's going to happen. I am not convinced that they're going to do this. If they know they don't have the votes, what's the point?
I don't know.
They're better off threatening.
She does do this dumb stuff that she knows she doesn't have the votes
they're not
for
smart.
a lot.
I get that. But, other people can talk to them. In May 2023, Biden cut a debt limit and spending deal with then Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Biden gave a bit, but the agreement cost McCarthy his job. Mike Johnson kept the spending levels. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and the White House held firm against poison pill amendments in the 2024 spending bills. They avoided a shutdown. Biden will get the $60 billion plus in Ukraine he sought, and although it's coming months late with battlefield consequences, the White House didn't have to accept new restrictions in Ukraine funding other than calling it a loan. Who cares? Republicans impeached Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, only to see it quickly dismissed by the Senate. The Biden impeachment is fizzling out. Johnson and former President Trump killed the bipartisan Senator border bill, an immigration deal, and that's given some political space for Biden and Democrats on that issue. And when they return to Capitol Hill next week, House Republicans will be down to a 1-vote margin of control for a while because Mike Gallagher's leaving, I guess, as the Senate conference seethes. And so when they come back, the threshold for reaching motion to vacate isn't 218. I think it's 217.
I guess.
I think.
Yeah, I don't know how many seats are vacant. It's hard.
But it's not.
But
it's not even that. It's of those present. So I'm not even sure what that number
true
is.
Too.
Some things are. It's fixed. Other things are no. It's a majority of whoever's there.
I would think so.
And so if it's a majority of whoever's there, something's always happening.
Yeah.
And the majority isn't always there.
Right.
So I don't know that they have the votes.
Yeah, and with very little interest in that motion among Democrats, you have to be. I guess Marjorie Taylor Greene got the idea in her head that it only takes a handful.
It only takes
of
3
Republicans.
Right?
Yeah,
she thinks it only takes 3 to vacate the chair
because
she's got herself, she's got Thomas Massie,
she's
got Paul Gosar. What else does she need?
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, if Democrats. Gee whiz, if Marjorie Taylor Greene could just convince the entire Democratic caucus to vote with her, then she'd get her way. Yeah, but 0 of them want to vote with you.
But even if she gets 3, I'm not even sure she gets a majority of the Republicans.
Yeah, maybe not. Oh, no, she was never going to get the majority. They didn't have the majority of Republicans the first time either.
So she's specifically counting on getting all Democrats.
She figures, they'll vote.
But Democrats could vote present.
Yeah, right. I don't think she understood the first time.
If they vote present, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if they vote present, then she loses.
Yeah.
Like 200-3 or whatever, you know, 213-3, whatever the number is.
Yeah, I guess so. That's whatever the Republicans.
214-3.
However many they got.
217.
So yeah, that won't work. She doesn't really get that. You know, this was, like we said, it's a unique situation where it's true that, you know, in most of these things, Democrats are not going to be enthusiastic or even want to or permit themselves to vote for a Republican for Speaker. But that's not the question. They voted
for a Republican rule. That should clue her in that things aren't the way she's expecting.
That's true, too. And they did it to, you know, essentially despite her. Not really.
Exactly. That's the point.
They were aiming, of course, at Ukraine, but they know how committed she is against Ukraine aid, so they were more than happy to also make her cranky.
If Marjorie Taylor Greene gave a news conference and said, I'm not succeeding here because everybody's out to get me, the rest of Congress, not just the Democrats, would say, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think somewhere stuck away in pocket someplace is a story, or maybe I didn't put it away. But anyway, there's a story circulating, at any rate, that Marjorie Taylor Greene is making enemies among the evangelical right-wing supporters of Mike Johnson who are excited about a weirdo fundamentalist being Speaker. And, you know, that's used to be part of her base. And now they're all like, hey, you're not standing up for good, solid Christians when they become Speaker. What are you, some kind of Satanist?
Not just that. I think I read somewhere that the Southern Baptist Convention came out in favor of Ukraine aid, which Marjorie Taylor Greene is against. That's part of the reason why Johnson felt he had some cover. But at the same time, that doesn't help her very much.
No, maybe they'll kick her out of church. I don't know if she's a Southern Baptist, but it's a pretty good bet.
So the Punch Bowl piece goes on to cover one of the stories we already covered, but it's so good it's worth repeating. House Republicans are openly attacking each other on the floor and in public.
Yeah, well, we heard one earlier.
They give other examples. Representative Thomas Massey, who's vowed to push Johnson out, has spent the weekend lashing out at his colleagues, including fellow Kentucky Republican Andy Barr, who represents an adjoining district. Tony Gonzalez from Texas said he suffered some real scumbags, and he mentioned Gates and Good. Of course, having a Democrat-controlled Senate has helped the White House hold the line against the GOP House. Schumer was able to keep Democrats together, and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries did the same with his colleagues. But the problem for House Republicans really began at the start of the Congress, with McCarthy's 15-vote battle in January 2023 to get the Speaker's gavel, which meant he gave up unprecedented concessions to the Freedom Caucus and put Massey, Roy, and Ralph Norman on the Rules Committee. That was the problem. We know this. You and I know this. We talked about it from the moment it happened. This was going to doom the GOP. It did. But instead of, and it was pretty clear why, there's a reason the Speaker's Conference was set up to be the Speaker's Conference, and now everybody in America knows what it is. You don't have a functioning Rules Committee, you cannot get anything done, at least not without the cooperation of the minority. And that means that Speaker Jeffries is the shadow speaker. So they go over all of this and point out the all-or-nothing nature of the GOP internal politics has ensured that Republicans haven't pulled off any real legislative achievements. Democrats also expect that Senate Republicans would instinctively back up House GOP leaders and potentially make it impossible to send must-pass legislation to Biden's desk. That didn't happen. That's Biden because he has relations with some of those senators. And so Senate Republican leaders ultimately recognized the House GOP's negotiating positions were untenable. And so for all of you who want to hold out until you get what you want, compromise is good. Sometimes incrementalism is good. That's what Biden practices. He got stuff done. He won. He won this Congress anyway.
Okay.
Wins are good. Election, but he won this Congress. But what about all this other stuff he did that we don't like? Every president does stuff you don't like.
That is true. Yeah, get used to it. Welcome to voting.
Get over it.
Yeah. I mean, you don't do what
you
want to do, but
you don't have to like him.
Yeah, that's true.
You just have to hate the other guy more.
Right. Well, if they're only offered 2, yeah. And, sometimes you're offered a third one, but they're usually crazy.
This is good from Regular Order by Jamie Dupre.
Yes.
I love Jamie Dupre. GOP feud continues over Ukraine aid. Here's advice from resigning Republicans. Drink more, tweet less.
Oh, okay.
That is perfect advice.
Is that hydration they're talking about, or?
Of course.
Yeah, okay. Just want to keep the message healthy.
Right.
That was the Boehner message.
This week the House is out. The Senate is going to try to give final approval for a long-delayed foreign aid bill. Trump's immunity case goes before the Supreme Court. I think that's Wednesday.
Trump's immunity.
I think the immunity
case. Yes. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know what date they have scheduled.
Yeah, because I think Tuesday is the hearing, the Sandoval hearing on what's going to be permissible in the trial.
Okay.
Some trial. Somewhere.
One of the trials, yeah.
One of the trials. And Monday today is opening for this trial. It's just a bad week for Trump and a bad week for Republicans.
Right. Yeah. And, okay. We're here for it. I'm here always. So it doesn't matter what happens. But
right. Dan Sullivan said on Face the Nation that he predicts you'll probably see a majority of Senate Republicans supporting the Ukraine bill and the other foreign aid. And if things work the way it's supposed to in the Senate,
they didn't though. Yeah.
Asterisk, always. Then Biden should sign it Wednesday night.
Okay. Is he talking about the majority of Senate Republicans?
Yeah, majority of Senate Republicans should support aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan.
That seems likely.
So a majority of the majority will support it. That means breaking the filibuster. That's the point of that.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, because you need 60 to do anything in the Senate in most cases. And in this particular case, if the majority of Senate Republicans support it, then you break the filibuster and you tell Rand Paul to sit down and shut up.
Yes. You might let him vent for a while. They sometimes do that.
Or invite a neighbor to discuss things with him while you go ahead and vote on everything else. That's
always an option, too. Yeah, I asked about it, whether he meant the Senate, because when the House voted, and this is kind of an important point, the majority of House Republicans were actually against Ukraine aid. They just didn't care to unseat Mike Johnson over it. That's an important point. So there's lots of disagreement about Ukraine, but even less agreement about helping Marjorie Taylor Greene with anything.
So there's an electoral piece to that, which I think is also important that often goes overlooked.
Okay.
And that is the vast majority of the country does not like Vladimir Putin and Russia.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if the House Freedom Caucus loves it.
That's probably right.
So if your party votes in the majority for Vladimir Putin, which they did on this Ukraine bill.
They did do that.
That's bad for you. It's going to be in every ad in the swing district.
Yeah. And that's something I did see pointed out. Somebody was, making an article out of the, I don't know if it's really article length topic, but yes, it's worth pointing out. We can all point and laugh at the Freedom Caucus. Well, first of all, that, and then remember that the Freedom Caucus kicked Marjorie Taylor Greene out. That's how out she is. She's out with the out group. And then, secondly, while people point at the Freedom Caucus and talk about a Republican fringe, no, the majority of Republicans in the House of Representatives voted against this Ukraine aid. That's the position of the Republican Party in the United States. And even if the Senate doesn't feel the same way, good, great, and all that. But, you're right. Probably the vast majority of Republican voters also dislike Putin and would prefer to see Ukraine prevail, and it even means supporting them militarily and financially. And for some reason, the People's House, the Republicans there, have got it backwards, and they're about to go into an election.
Yep. And
they're also backwards on abortion.
That the public supports Ukraine over Russia because Donald Trump has been pretty quiet about it.
Yes, he does sense it's like a vaccine moment for him.
It's a vaccine abortion moment for him.
Yeah.
I mean, he's on the wrong side of all of these issues. He knows it. And so that's
he tries to reposition, pretend
he
wasn't.
Well, he's going to go back to caravans, but the problem is that he blocked caravan legislation.
Oh, well, yeah, okay.
So
that won't help a great deal.
It's just a weak political position.
Yeah.
And Jamie Dupree does confirm that Mike Gallagher resigned from Congress on Saturday.
That was the 19th. Is that right?
So now their majority is, well, they've got 217 to 213.
Okay.
They can only lose one vote.
The 19th was
for a while.
Friday, I think. But okay, yeah, so good. And then somebody else is coming in somewhere along the line. It only lasts for a little while. But I guess a good time for them to be on recess. Put away, some of the time that they spend with only a 1-vote margin is not in session. All right. Well, terrific.
Okay. Other bad news for Republicans this week. Mike Pence, of all people, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times pointing out that for evangelicals, Trump is awful on abortion. Trump is waffling. Trump is backing away from his best position. I worked for Trump because he was good to us. Trump has betrayed the pro-life movement is the headline.
All right.
Again, remember, this is not going to gin up votes for Trump. He can't afford to lose anybody. He loses 3 votes over this. It's bad for him from regular voters.
Okay. Well, good, because likely he will. And all right, well, Mike Pence in the New York Times. Well, sure.
Well, the point is the evangelical vote. I don't care what Mike Pence thinks. I don't care what what's his name, John Bolton, the mustache guy, thinks.
Yeah.
But and I don't care what Bill Barr thinks.
All right.
But I do care what the voters do. And if he loses votes because of Mike Pence is saying, you know what, don't be fooled, Donald Trump is a waffling weasel. Okay. That doesn't make Mike Pence a good guy.
No, especially as none of the votes that Trump loses will come from the Pence household.
Right. So,
despite all this,
it doesn't matter.
He's a waffling weasel.
If Pence is speaking to the evangelicals and he convinces even some of the evangelicals to, that's where you get to Dahlia and Anat's point that,
true.
You have to gain votes in order to win. Losing votes doesn't win for you.
No.
Now here's Axios pointing out reality. Hakeem Jeffries emerges as Congress's shadow speaker. This is such a weird concept. I'm still wrapping my head around it.
Yeah,
but
okay.
If you can't get anything done unless you have Democratic support, that gives Jeffries an incredible amount of power. Doesn't make him speaker,
right?
But it's certainly a check and balance on the most extreme things that Republicans want to do.
Yes.
And Republicans are not, shall we say, in array right now.
Right. We just need something alliterative way of saying it.
Republicans in retreat, that kind of thing.
Okay. All right. Risarray, like I'm Scooby-Doo.
Right.
Ruh-roh.
But Democrats do something unheard of in modern politics, crossing the aisle in the House Rules Committee to save the foreign aid package. All of the veteran Congress watchers are just astounded that Democrats voted for a Republican rule. Now, it has happened before. It happened like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So it's not unprecedented in the sense.
I imagine it must have happened before.
It's unprecedented.
Occasionally, you get what you want out of a rule.
Unprecedented in your term in Congress, so that you don't know, because you don't know anything about history.
Yeah. Back in the day, or whenever, every once in a while, when you hear people howl for either regular order or if they're old enough, open rules. When there were open rules, there was no particular ideological reason to oppose an open rule. It was a matter of a roll call. You just vote against the other side's
I'm sorry
rules.
I didn't set the tweet aside. It just made me. I think I sent it to you.
Oh.
But
you did send something, yes.
Yeah. It was just
which one?
It was a funny.
I got it.
Take
the process party
on the process party. Yes, that's what it was. Do you have it?
Yeah, I do. Or at least I have the quote of it. There's no link here to it, but I did have it and provided. Yeah, the a member saying this sort of thing never happens, right?
Yes.
Okay. And
then the procedural pedants say, "How quickly forget about Speaker Frumpington's deft procedural maneuvers in passing the Tariff Act of 1847."
Right. Yeah, there's always something.
Sometimes we get to be like that on the show, but it's funny. It's funny because it has happened, and it does matter, but not in the way you think. It matters in the sense that it just makes you look like a fool for having never done this stuff.
Yes.
Why don't the Democrats vote with the Republicans on things that matter? Isn't that what's supposed to happen?
I guess in a way, when the rules are fair. But
when the rules are fair, but the rules are never fair. They're not set up to be fair.
They're not supposed to. Well, yeah, that's right. They rarely are. And even when they are, well, it never happened because it also still wasn't necessary. I understand that this rule is fair, but, it's not my job to pass your rules.
Yeah, you don't need my votes.
You have a 14-vote majority. You can do it. You have a 20-vote majority. You have a 30-vote majority. That's usually what happens.
Yeah.
You don't need us.
The committee is 30 Republicans and 3 Democrats. What difference does it make what the Democrats do?
Right. So we're just here to provide a quorum, and so we use the rules votes a little bit like we use the journal vote, like who people vote no on approving the journal. I do approve of the journal. Why did I vote no? Because this is a census. This is attendance taking in the morning. How many have we got? How many have they got? That's all. Who's here and who's not?
Well, that's the same thing. You guys are such hypocrites. That's the same thing as opposing the election certification on January 6th.
Yeah, that's what they like to say.
You hear that too.
Yeah. No, this is just me saying I'm here for the morning.
This isn't trying to hang Mike Pence. I'm sorry.
Well, that's true too. And I don't know. It's an odd thing to make an accusation about, but there you have it. These things do happen. You forget about them from time to time, but okay. So occasionally we're reminded. And by the way, yes, sometimes we feel like a procedural pedant about that. But I have this advantage. I will say the impeachment of Secretary of War William Belknap made late night joke routine. I've told everybody about that for 10 years, and Stephen Colbert said it in his monologue the other night. Like, okay, I win.
Right.
I've mainstreamed that. It wasn't just me. It happened. It's a historical thing.
Yeah.
People, and the Mayorkas impeachment made it relevant.
But he should have led up to it by mentioning Speaker Frumpington. That would have just, added icing to the cake.
And I have a feeling he'll eventually do that. There was no Speaker Frumpington, but it sounds like.
But you have to step back.
Yes. All right.
And look at what Shadow Speaker Jeffries has done.
Not Frumpington. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's a Pelosi sort of move.
Mm-hmm.
He got, on that Ukraine vote, unanimous Democratic votes. Yeah. What I'm saying is he got iconoclasts like Jared Golden from Maine, dissidents like Cory Bush. Mm-hmm. I mean, he got everybody in his party to vote together. He held the fractious Democratic coalition together in the House. That is quite an achievement.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if there's a great deal
that
of
happens as often as Democrats voting on a Republican rule. I mean, it doesn't happen. There's always even Pelosi was good at, okay, we got the votes because I'm the best vote counter there is. You can vote against me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. There were usually, when you don't have that margin, of course, you don't dismiss anybody and let them go. You'd rather hold on to them. I guess you could force a couple of unanimous votes, but it also...
Well, there was a message here, too, as the minorities, so you didn't want any defections, but he pulled it off. Yeah. Just because he wanted that doesn't mean he gets that.
That is true. It's good practice, and you'll need it.
And something else he did, which is also under the radar, which I think will pay dividends in the end. He didn't embarrass Mike Johnson at any time during this whole thing.
Oh. Okay.
Right. The difference between Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a noisemaker, not a lawmaker, who makes noise but not law, going and complaining about Jeffries, quiet behind the scenes, didn't embarrass Johnson. There was no reason for Republicans to unite behind something because Democrats were doing the other thing because Jeffries gave them no reason to. Mm-hmm. And he made sure there was no reason to. And again, this is one of these under the radar, but he did it things, which is really important.
Yeah, okay. That's a good thing. Point it out, let everybody know. The quiet things behind the scenes make a difference. They don't get a lot of news coverage, but they're well worth it. Well worth pointing out so you understand dynamics. Later on, it'll become important.
Here's an example of, and this is after the vote, so it doesn't matter as much. Mm-hmm. But here's the kind of thing that Jeffries prevented from happening. This is Democrat Texas Representative Greg Casar. C-A-S-A-R. Never heard of him, but here he is.
Yeah, okay.
He's apparently a leading Progressive Caucus member.
Oh.
I never heard of him, but there he is.
Okay.
He said, Mike Johnson should just pack up and resign and hand the gavel over to Leader Jeffries. Leader Jeffries seems to be able to manage this process in a much more democratic way, in a way that gets bills to the floor. That may be true. You don't say it. Why don't you say it? Because you don't want to rally Republicans.
Jeffries doesn't say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And right. And it's actually not a bad play, really. You know, you do say it, and then Jeffries said, no.
Says look, that's not where we go with this.
Even though wink, yes, yeah. Maybe it is one day, but not today.
I'm handing you the card for what you're supposed to read, and then I'm going to tell you that no, you don't say that.
Yeah, but you told me to say shh.
You're not supposed to read the stage directions, right. Okay?
Yeah, that's a good point too. And he's playing his role correctly. He's not, freelancing that probably. And even if he is, it's not out of keeping with a lot of people's thinking inside the Democratic caucus. But
anyway,
today we're getting what we
get
want.
Comments from 7 or 8 different Democrats saying, "Boy, he really did this well."
Good. Fantastic. Hey, as it turns out, there was a whole other generation of entirely competent leaders. Terrific. And
starting with Speaker Frumpington, who one of the buildings is named after.
Right. I think. Which one? I don't know. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on At Roots Radio. We continue on. Greg Dworkin, well done all the way through the entirety of the segment, all the recovery. Hopefully behind him, still a little bit, still a little lingering, but it sounds good and voice was strong, so that's good. And, there's always a little bit of coughing and whatnot that goes on during, any season of the year. That's reality. Okay, so we're glad to have had him help us carry us through the entirety of the first hour. I did mention along the way somewhere that I had seen at least one article discussing the, I don't know, can we say it's established as fact? Well, it is anti-Marjorie Taylor Greene, so let's call it a fact that she's on the outs, not only with the Freedom Caucus, that's been established, but with evangelicals, because they are unhappy about one of their own, Speaker Mike Johnson, having come under attack from her. And I don't know if it was necessarily the one I was thinking of. Well, then again, I'm not necessarily sure there were more than one. But there was definitely something that I had seen published in recent days that was about that. And here it is from April 19th, which may or may not have been Friday, or Saturday or Sunday. If you don't know what day it is, it doesn't make a difference. But it is a Sarah Posner piece on MSNBC. I don't know whether she presented this on screen at any point, but this is on the written side of MSNBC. Marjorie Taylor Greene's attempts to out Jesus Mike Johnson aren't going to work. And that was, I'm sure, a doomed effort from the beginning. But it shifts in the subheader here. The speaker's allies are not pleased with efforts to oust him. And we don't just mean here his political allies in the House not pleased. I think it was Sarah's argument, and maybe I saw this part of the argument on social media as she was discussing the article. So we'll see whether the body of the article discusses it. Allies of the speaker, both inside and outside Congress, not just his political allies in the House, but his evangelical allies outside of it. And this is the way she puts it. As Speaker Mike Johnson attempts to shepherd a package of foreign aid bills, and he did, although you could argue that it was Hakeem Jeffries, but Hakeem Jeffries won't spend the day coming to the microphone saying that. But wink, it probably was him. As Speaker Mike Johnson attempts to shepherd a package of foreign aid bills, including one with vital aid for Ukraine, through the House of Representatives, all eyes are on, well, not really, Marjorie Taylor Greene's threat to oust him. They shouldn't have been on that because if they were on that threat, it was in order, I think, really, to report that it had no chance in hell of passing or being adopted, I guess would be the terminology used, because she'd be offering a resolution. Anyway, so far, only Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky has backed her efforts, and then she was joined by somebody said yes, and I forget who, and Greg mentioned the name, and it doesn't matter, because if you're counting votes, 3 is not a count that you should be announcing. Anyway, only Thomas Massie has backed her efforts, but other far-right members surrounded Johnson on the House floor to express their disagreements. Greene and her fellow ideologues, and there aren't any, may want, by the way, I'll add that, may want to tread carefully. That's not something that she does, by the way, treading carefully. There is a growing backlash on the Christian right against the move to oust Johnson. That's the outside allies that we were talking about. While Greene's MAGA influencer antics garner significant media attention, people with longtime clout in the evangelical political trenches, including Johnson himself, have been waging a quiet but scathing war against her in Christian media. I don't know whether she was intending to imply there that Johnson himself, like by saying including Johnson himself, including him in what? Waging a quiet but scathing war against her? Maybe. I kind of hope so. But I think the implication was that people with longtime clout in the evangelical political trenches is the group that includes Johnson himself. Not necessarily the group that have been waging a quiet but scathing war against her in Christian media, but maybe. The Gop's evangelical base, vital to Republican hopes in the fall, is hearing that Greene is groundlessly attacking a godly man and imperiling the party's election chances, thus bringing, in Johnson's words, the Democrats' crazy woke agenda closer to fruition. That sort of, maybe even seems like it deserves the dramatic music in a way, but I don't know, just because it's one of my favorite sound bites anyway. That's not great for Marjorie Taylor Greene. It is interesting. I had the competing thoughts as I was reading that. One, you would think ultimately if you're talking about, I don't know what portion of Christian conservatives this would include, but certainly that they would be supportive of Johnson as a fellow evangelical, but they also, I think, probably see Marjorie Taylor Greene as something of a fake evangelical. But the evangelicals must know that a significant portion of their base are the people that they consider in some ways to be fake evangelicals. They just, loudmouthed about Jesus and Christianity, but not particularly good at practicing it, let's say. And, not a whole lot of people are particularly good at practicing their religion in an orthodox way. That's okay, but then you don't go around saying you are, a Christian exemplar. But Marjorie Taylor Greene does. Even though, maybe that marriage not doing so well, maybe got a bit of a reputation for playing around with people at your gym, for instance, or you're just not a particularly understanding or godly person generally, and you're mean and vituperative and loudmouthed, and as a woman, that's not really in line with the evangelical ideal, let's say. They still cling to things like that. Lots of people do for whatever reason, sometimes from a completely different religion. They cling to it, sometimes not religious at all, but they cling to it anyway. I don't know. Anyway, on the other hand, she may also be thinking, but Donald Trump is everything that evangelicals say they hate, but yet they love him. But then that's just another example of, the Donald Trump personal play is not going to work for anyone who isn't Donald Trump, including Donald Trump Jr. in all likelihood. But so don't count on that. And Marjorie Taylor Greene hasn't got the skills of any kind to make that happen. Anyway, back to the article. Johnson himself struck first, appearing, so I guess he is a part of both groups, struck first, appearing on the Christian Broadcasting Network with David Brody, a popular evangelical reporter known for nabbing newsy interviews with Washington insiders, if you say so. The speaker pushed back at Greene's attack on his faith, including a tirade on Twitter, under its new name, railing against Johnson's supposedly unchristian capitulation to big government spending. And so she's tweeting, Speaker Johnson, you can't follow Christ and fund full-term abortion clinics, which don't exist, of course, but whatever. Greene wrote, never mind that there is no federal funding for abortion, nor is there such a thing as a full-term abortion. Greene's aim was to one-up Johnson as the most ardent Christian patriot in the room, fully aware that Brody's audience knows his long track record as a loyal foot soldier in the battle for the Christian nation. Johnson reminded CBN viewers of his Christian bona fides. I try to follow all the biblical admonitions as I do every day, Johnson said. One of them says, you bless those who persecute you. I'm getting a lot of practice in that right now, and that is a soft word turns away wrath. And there's just no way that, it's just not part of Marjorie Taylor Greene's practice, for one thing. And it's just also she's not very smart and hasn't memorized all of the relevant Bible passages, and he has. And that's going to work against her. A few days after the CBN interview, Johnson appeared on the inaugural episode of right-wing Salem News Networks. Is another one? Too many right-wing news networks. Salem News Network. That's the one they burn witches with, I guess. That's their new show, This Week on the Hill, hosted by the Family Research Council president, Tony Perkins. We're still not rid of him. At first, Johnson and Perkins, one of the most influential evangelical figures inside the Beltway, spent considerable time attacking President Biden and the Democrats. But then they turned their attention inside the Gop caucus. While Perkins and Johnson did not name Greene directly, the implication was obvious, as was their fear that her theatrics could cost Republicans on Election Day. Perkins first criticized some members of Congress who are here to build, here more to build their brand than they are to govern and lead the country. Ooh, my. I think we know who they're talking about. Johnson insisted that I'm not talking about anyone individually. Very Christian of him. That's good. But went on to admonish Republicans to make sure people who come here are coming to govern and not just to be famous. But after Perkins brought up Greene's motion to vacate, the pair lambasted it and or lambasted it. I love that word. I hate that word. And her threats to shut down the government, which they concluded would only come back to bite them in November. This is not to say that they don't secretly love being bitten. I'm just saying that they recognize that this will happen. Okay. This is a dangerous gambit, Johnson concluded. We've got to keep the train on the tracks, and this is not a helpful thing. Perkins also interviewed Greene's fellow Georgia Republican Rich McCormick, who, not incidentally, supports U.S. aid to Ukraine. Perkins, Johnson, and McCormick did not directly address the aid bill, but McCormick did take a shiv into Greene. This has no thought process behind it, he said in the motion to vacate, and it really didn't. Comparing it to tackling the quarterback of your own team. In case his message wasn't clear enough, McCormick added that Johnson, a proven conservative, was chosen by God. Wow. Okay. I mean, that's the sort of thing they ordinarily say about themselves. Of course, that's something that murdery traitor Greene says about herself as well. I was chosen by God, called me to come and do this, but nobody really believes it. She just doesn't put on the show correctly. She doesn't know the lingo well enough. She just figures if she says Jesus, God, Christian a lot, that it'll just work. But she can't even imitate the language. She's just not skilled. All right. Well, it hasn't just been men attacking a prominent female member of the Gop caucus, although you could imagine that might end up being the case. But apparently not. Penny Nance, president of Concerned Women for America, which I forgot about briefly, another powerful Christian right group with a strong Capitol Hill presence, published an op-ed in Newsweek, which I'm trying to forget about, earlier this month, calling on Greene to give up her pointless effort. Every day, her attacks get more shrill and conspiratorial. She has questioned Johnson's faith, claimed that he has surrendered to Democrats, and even suggested that he's being blackmailed, Nance wrote. Can such dissenters ever be satisfied? No, by the way, they can't. And there's a long history of that. They're all over the political spectrum, and on any given topic, you'll run into that, right? Can such dissenters ever be satisfied? Probably not. Or are they more interested in the 15 minutes of fame that comes with bashing their leader? Like Perkins and Johnson, Nance cast aspersions on Greene's motives and warned that her stunts could cost the party in November. The Republicans now turning on Johnson may need a reminder that we are only 7 months from an election, she wrote. The Gop's far-right flank is still making noise about deposing Johnson, but more than anyone else, Christian right veterans know the electoral landscape is already fraught for the party of Trump and abortion bans. Their face-off with the Freedom Caucus gadflies sends the unmistakable signal that they are terrified of losing in November. They are also sending a signal to Greene and anyone else who joins her that they already know who they are going to blame for the fallout if she pulls the trigger to unseat Johnson. Although I wouldn't worry too much about that. If she pulls the trigger to unseat Johnson, the gun just won't go off. So, I mean, it's not a big deal. They don't really have to worry about that part of it, but it is worthwhile to say, we will be blaming you if Republicans lose come November, which is fine, and I hope that I will have the opportunity to help them come to blame her for it. And they won't be wrong. Part of my vote will absolutely be cast as an effort to be rid once and for all of the influence of murdery traitor Greene. All right, so a flurry of activity in Skype messaging here from Greg, so let's check in and see what that's about. Down at the bottom of I think just in Sandoval rulings, which I guess is legal lingo about the kind of motions going on behind the scenes here. But do we want to look that up, by the way? See if we can figure out what this is. Has to do with jury hearings, so this must be happening in New York, or jury selection must be happening in the New York trial. All right, let's see what Greg has to say, and then we'll straighten out the lingo of it later on. News, it says here. This comes from the bad place, not hell, but Twitter, similar. From Adam Klasfeld, let's see, who are we looking at? MSNBC contributor and a fellow at Just Security. So he's watching up in New York. Justice Merchan indicates he will recite his Sandoval rulings now. Remember, these determine the permissible boundaries of cross-examination if Trump decides to testify. Oh, okay. So excellent. Somewhat clears these things up, and the boundaries of cross-examination. All right, let me head back instead. Should I be reading his tweet thread or Greg's notes here? He may have just been transferring what Adam's saying over to Skype notes. But the news is that Trump can be confronted by the ruling against him in the New York Attorney General's civil fraud case, the judge rules. Okay, so they're of course, two separate cases, both in New York, but we know about the civil fraud case. That's the one with the $450 million judgment against him. Letitia James brought it. It was about their business practices, and the one for which he's having such difficulty posting a bond. And by the way, today is April 22nd. Now I now realize I should have known exactly what day it was, because April 22nd is the date, in addition to all the rest of the things going on here, the things in the New York criminal trial, beginning with opening statements, the Wednesday, I believe Greg said, hearing in front of the Supreme Court with respect to his immunity claims. April 22nd is also the date that was set by Justice Engoron, also back in New York in the state courts, for a hearing on the bond situation in that Letitia James case, Letitia James prosecuted case, brought against him for the civil fraud charges. And so we'll see what comes of the discussion of the bond that isn't a bond, and the paperwork being all screwed up, and yes, no, maybe they've filed this thing, I don't know. And will Letitia James be moving to get Justice Engoron to authorize property seizures right away, or are they going to give him more time to post the bond? Now, Greg is reminding me, this is about Merchan is in the criminal trial. Yes, true, but I just wanted to point out that that is also happening today. April 22nd, I forgot about it, and I was incensed 10 days ago when he should have defaulted on the bond already, and they said, all right, we'll have a hearing, and we'll schedule it on April 22nd, and it seemed so far away, but now that all coincides with everything else that's happening today. Now, back to the actual criminal trial. The point here is Judge Merchan says that it will be permissible, should Trump take the stand as a witness in his own defense, to question him about the civil fraud case for which there's the $450 million judgment against him. Because you would think you'd want that to be part of the questioning. After all, you're there to say, yeah, people call it a hush money case, etc. But as we've been saying, it has to do to some extent with hush money, but the hush money was supposed to essentially execute a fraud against the people by violating campaign finance law as well. So that's a fraud in itself. So will you be able to say, you say that you weren't trying to defraud anybody with this hush money case, but isn't it the case that you're kind of a habitual fraudster? You've been convicted, or you've been found liable right here in the state of New York, just, I don't know, however many blocks away, for $450 million worth of fraud. So why should we, how is it that we can no longer, you tell us we can't imagine that you could be involved in $130,000 worth of fraud, but you've been involved in $450 million worth of fraud. Just this year, you were found liable for that. So, okay, the judge says you can ask him about that in this criminal case. Trump also can be confronted with findings of his gag order violations in his civil fraud case if he testifies, the judge rules. That's helpful as well. Trump can also be confronted with 2 federal juries finding that he defamed E. Jean Carroll if he testifies. So far, they're hitting it out of the park here. Trump can also be confronted with his agreement to dissolve the Trump Foundation if he testifies, the judge rules. Notably, the judge appears to have excluded the sexual abuse finding in the E. Jean Carroll case. That's interesting, and I guess they figured sometimes it's a balancing act. The same justification could argue for allowing questioning about his sexual abuse and, I guess, what we would call the rape finding against him. But the judges are usually balancing, okay, well, is this, that, or the other topic that the prosecution proposes asking questions about, or the defense just imagines that the prosecution might ask questions about. Allowing those questions, would they be substantially more prejudicial to the defendant or more probative of the truth about the defendant? And I suppose at the point where you say you can ask him about having been found liable for $450 million worth of fraud, you can ask him about having to be the subject of a gag order over and over again and violating it. And I guess you could ask him about making people at the defense table gag with his horrible gas, but they didn't ask about that. You can also say, well, you definitely were found to have defamed E. Jean Carroll. So you're guilty of fraud, defamation, violations of gag orders, and contempt of court. You can talk about the fact that you had your charitable foundation yanked away from you, or you're not allowed to serve on the board of any charity in New York State. You can do all of this, but after all that has been established, you can't say, well, I don't want you to go to. Well, weren't you held liable for rape, sexual assault against E. Jean Carroll? Yes, true, but that doesn't help tell us very much about, although honestly, I guess with the hush money, the kind of hush money he was paying, but they might say, well, that was consensual sex, so that doesn't really bear directly on this. But the other part of this case, you're a liar and everybody knows it, and you've established it over and over and over again. You're a fraudster. You're a liar. You are a defamer. You are a violator of court orders. All those things are permissible on cross-examination. So what else have we got here? The context of the E. Jean Carroll rulings nuance. Evidence about prior bad acts must balance relevance with undue prejudice to the accused. Like I said, there the legal parlance is, the term of art there is whether or not the evidence proposed or what you think you'll elicit on testimony is substantially more probative than prejudicial. Or if it's substantially more prejudicial than probative, you exclude that line of questioning. Trump isn't charged in this case with sexual assault, but with falsifying business records. So that's what they want to get at. Stuff that would tend to prove that you're the kind of person who would falsify business records, i.e., you're a liar, you violate court orders, you're a defamer, you are guilty of fraud in several cases. That's relevant. Go ahead. So the judge allowed that goes to his credibility. And this is why Merchan appeared to confine his green light to prosecutors on the Carroll verdicts to the defamation findings only. So there you go. Anything else from the notes that I didn't cover? No, I think so. I think that sums it up. So, okay, thank you. That's good breaking news. That's the only thing that we want breaking in New York courts today. If Trump has any plans on breaking anything, wind or otherwise, we hope that he'll just keep it to himself. But you know how he is. Unlikely for that to work out as planned. Okay, now we can jump back to Pocket and other inputs here and see what else we might be able to share with you that is of relevance. Oh, this morning I saw something else that, did we finish reading the discussion or the article about, I don't know. I guess so. I should look and see if we put it in the archive or not. But the article about, here we are. The New Republic work about Russia is buying politicians in Europe. Is it happening here too? I bring that up because I saw this morning being circulated on social media another article with a similar topic. And it's interesting to see it being circulated again and again in ways that sort of evidence surprise that this is even happening. But The Guardian, usually on top of such things, has this to add a headline: France being, quote, pounded by Russian disinformation, says Minister. So we can read into the details of what's exactly is happening in France and find out. But once again, I remind you that in, June of 2016, when that recording was made between the Republican leadership, let's say Paul Ryan there, Kevin McCarthy there, Kathy McMorris, McRogers, McBean there, Steve Scalise there, many of them. And, of course, it became infamous for Kevin McCarthy blurting out that, I think Putin pays Trump. But again, that whole conversation was about having just been warned by the then Prime Minister of Ukraine that it was happening in Ukraine and happening all across the West, and it should be expected everywhere in the West. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Sounds like the ruling's out of the way. That means opening statements begin, and the prosecution is up and getting things started. So that sounds interesting. Also, courtroom reporters noting that it doesn't appear that any of Trump's family members are present in the courtroom this morning. It's cold and unpleasant, perhaps, compared to Florida. And, of course, who wants to seal themselves in a Dutch oven with Donald Trump all day long. Also, word from courtroom reporters that he does appear to be falling asleep, as usual. He's having great difficulty keeping his eyes open. The rulings from the judge would likely not interest him very much, and he doesn't understand what they are anyway, so he might be nodding off. I guess if he's nodding off during opening statements as well, he just can't stay awake. It's very interesting that I understood that he was not why he was nodding off during jury selection. A, that's boring, but B, for someone like Donald Trump, a whole day's worth of talking about other people, nothing could be less interesting. But you'd think that the trial just starting and opening statements, and, that's kind of an exciting moment, but not for Donald Trump. He's falling asleep, and apparently Todd Blanche is sliding notes to him and nudging him awake again. I mean, I'd love to know what those notes say, and we'll never find out, but the notes may just say, like, we talked about this. Stay awake. And we'll see whether he has any ability to do that. Anyway, jumping back to where we were before the break, the Guardian's piece here titled, and it's from this morning, Lisa O'Carroll, reporting from Europe in Strasbourg, as a matter of fact. France being pounded by Russian disinformation, says Minister. And again, just reminding you, this is exactly what we were told to expect, that it wasn't going to be limited to Ukraine, and that Russian disinformation ought to be expected to be piled on across the West. Western Europe, yes, definitely wanted to do his best to sow dissension among Western European democracies and the European Union, but that you should also expect it eventually in the United States. And of course, we have seen it, but, are more or less powerless to do that much about it at this point. I don't know what. But anyway, happening in France too, and that means an opportunity to try to mispronounce French names. In this case, the minister who is giving the comments is, Jean-Noel Barrot, I think, is how I might make my best stab at pronouncing his name. And he says propaganda via social media and fake websites may distort the European Union's election results. What do you know? Again, pretty much what we were warned of and what we were watching happen as they spoke in 2016. I still haven't settled on a pronunciation or a convention of how to read the number for whatever reason. And so as we saw, as it was happening, they were discussing it. And of course, the real shocking part, I suppose, about the whole discussion was that even after saying that the Ukrainians had just warned them of this terrible prospect, they still concluded, well, this disinformation is coming in to the benefit of Republican electoral efforts. So why don't we all just agree to keep it a secret in exchange for power, or what passes for power? And then, as it turns out, Ryan was out shortly thereafter, and Kevin McCarthy became leader of the Republicans. And then as soon as he actually got the power of the speakership, he was ousted from that as well, because he was never really endowed with the abilities to handle such power, and B, the whole thing, well, how do you hold on to power at all when the power is premised on any one of us could lie viciously at any time and just plant disinformation about everyone else and unseat them that way? If you can unseat a presumptive president, or turn it such that the presidential candidate who gets the vast majority of votes, well, not the vast majority, but wins by several million votes in the popular vote, and still engineer it so that, one, she's not handed the presidency, and two, the person who is handed the presidency will have gained it with the overt assistance of the Russians, and still say, hey, everything's normal, go for it, then sure, you're not going to be able to hold on to this power of the speakership either. It's fleeting power that comes with this kind of manipulation. But too late. Anyway, what's happening in France? France is being pounded by Russian disinformation that could distort the result of the upcoming EU parliamentary elections. France's Minister for Europe has said. Jean-Noel Barrot. It's B-A-R-R-O-T. So I'm guessing correctly. Barrot, maybe. Said in an interview with, West France, O-U-E-S-T, which I guess is West. Certainly looks like it. That Russian propaganda was being disseminated across social media platforms on a weekly basis. Well, it's happening daily, but maybe they only refresh the propaganda every week. We are being pounded by the propaganda of Vladimir Putin's Russia and its communication corridors, he said. Not a week goes by without France being the target of coordinated and deliberate maneuvers. And remember, this is a British paper, so they spell maneuvers with an O in the middle of the maneuvers. Maneuvers to disrupt public debate and interfere in the campaign for the European elections. There is a tweet embedded herein from Jean-Noel, who says the same thing but in French. And there's no point in my trying to read you that. He cited several examples, including the launch of a fake French Ministry of Defense website, claiming that 200,000 French people were being called up to fight in Ukraine. Now, I don't know what it would take to dissuade people of that in France. Mostly, look around. Do you think that's happening? But maybe, I don't know whether that was meant to fool people in France or fool people elsewhere, but interesting tactic. A link to the site was posted on Twitter at the end of March. The site is a fake government site and has been reposted by malevolent accounts as part of a disinformation campaign, the French Defense Ministry said at the time. These doppelganger sites, identified as one of several forms of Russian disinformation, involve the creation of websites that look identical to bona fide and authoritative sources, such as government or mainstream media sites. That's interesting. In other words, they're forging the websites of the French Defense Ministry to try to pass off this propaganda, much as we here in America witnessed one major party of the United States forging electoral certificates and simply saying, no, the other guy won this state. Everybody's into forgery these days. Other fake news Barrot cited was a recent announcement from a fake Ministry of Interior site claiming France was, I'm going to give it a little bit of European pronunciation, France was tightening up conditions of entry for Ukrainians when in fact people from Ukraine are allowed to live and work in the EU under a bloc-wide temporary protection directive. He also mentioned false stories about a rise in tuberculosis in France. Barrot said the risk to the EU elections on running from June 6th through the 9th are the elections. But the risk is proven. That's the quote, is proven. Belgium, which holds the 6-month rotating presidency of the EU. That doesn't mean the president has to turn around and around but rather, of course, that the presidency of the EU is shared among the member nations. And I guess Belgium at the moment holds the gavel, in case you were wondering, who holds the gavel in all this? The answer is Belgium. And they said that it was, Belgium as an entity, not the president, but Belgium as an entity said it was looking at activating a temporary crisis task force to monitor and coordinate the response to Russian disinformation campaigns. That does sound odd. I imagine it probably was the president who said this, but I guess because it's a 6-month rotating presidency. Never bother getting familiar with what person on behalf of which country holds the gavel as the EU president. Just know that it's a particular country. What country do they represent? So Belgium holds the presidency, and Belgium itself said it was looking at activating a temporary crisis task force to monitor and coordinate response. Good idea. I'd say get to it. More than look at it, do it. But there's no convincing the Belgians. Anyway, the Integrated Political Crisis Response Unit was used last at the start of the war in Ukraine and then during the COVID pandemic. Sources in Belgium say it would be in operation for 2 months. And it's not clear to me whether, is this an EU-wide thing, an integrated political crisis response unit, or is it a Belgian thing that they were considering using in Belgium or replicating, I imagine, community-wide? Not that clear, but I would imagine they want to use it community-wide if the propaganda attacks are community-wide. 2 weeks ago, the Belgian Prime Minister, Alejandro de Croo, C-R-O-O, de Croo, revealed the Belgian Federal Prosecutor's Office had opened an official investigation into alleged payments by the Kremlin to members of the European Parliament, MEPs, after it received classified intelligence from the country's security services. He said the mission to, quote, help elect more pro-Russian candidates in the European Parliament and to reinforce a certain pro-Russian narrative in that institution was very clear. The Czech government recently discovered an alleged Russian disinformation operation aimed at influencing the EU elections as well. The EU regularly warns about the rise of disinformation, sometimes targeting the election, but also to sow the seed that civil society is crumbling and to amplify dissent on such issues as Ukraine, migration, and LGBTQ rights. They basically seeded and executed Brexit, so hey, they can do pretty much anything. Its disinformation unit has identified 17,000 specific cases of false information on social media and doppelganger sites. So they're rooting it out the best they can. But again, we were warned, and here it is. And actually, here it has been since 2016 on. Russia, if you're listening, which, it seems pretty clear they are. Okay, sure. Whatever. Okay, that, I thought, an important inclusion in all of this. Oh, yes, right. We've jumped out of Pocket now as a result of the new version of Pocket, or perhaps the way people are setting up their websites to work with Pockets. Okay, back we go. And let's see. Other things ready for or presented for inclusion here. Let's see. Got to make some choices here on the fly. One, and this is of interest too, just a narrow slice of January 6th FAFO. This one reported in the Capital Gazette. Where's the Capital Gazette? Oh, I guess we're talking about Maryland. So the Annapolis area, that's the capital in question, has this one. A Proud Boys leader from Millersville, so presumably Millersville, Maryland, who beat officers, as many of them did, on January 6th, sentenced to 5.5 years in prison. So that's a pretty substantial prison sentence, and good thing, too. The punishment is the largest rendered against a January 6th defendant by a D.C. judge, or by this, well, I don't know. I guess what it's supposed to mean is it's one of the largest sentences, and it was given by a D.C. judge. Not that it was necessarily this D.C. judge's longest sentence. I don't know. Weird construction there. Luke Parker writes this actually for the Baltimore Sun, and then republished here in the Capital Gazette, where I have seen it. A Proud Boys leader from Millersville who beat police officers during the attack on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison on Friday. So, okay. The punishment was the largest rendered against a January 6th defendant by U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan. We've heard her name quite a bit in connection with these cases, who has presided over several other criminal cases stemming from the insurrection, an event she called the most consequential and serious in our country's history. One, and I think she's right, one that created great divides and will continue to. And by the way, thanks, Luke, for clearing that up. That headline and subheader made it sound like I wasn't 100% sure what you meant, or what was meant by the longest sentence. And now we know this actually was, I guess, the longest sentence imposed by Tanya Chutkan so far. And Tanya Chutkan, of course, also presiding over the Jack Smith case being prosecuted in Washington, right? The Trump election interference and government overthrow, however we're going to have to term it, case that's being brought here in Washington, as opposed to Eileen Cannon, who's presiding over the documents side of the Jack Smith prosecution. So, okay. In the meantime, she's sentencing January 6th, violent January 6th protesters to 5.5 years in prison. Now, I don't know whether this means anything in particular, because it's a very common surname, but as it turns out, we're talking about the defendant Scott Thomas Miller of Millersville. So, it could be coincidence, or sometimes, is this like the scion of the family that founded the town? I don't know. Not entirely clear. Not entirely clear that it matters one way or the other. Just sort of interest as you read this. Issuing her decision on Friday in Washington, the judge alluded to the level of aggression displayed by one Scott Thomas Miller at the Capitol's Lower West Terrace, a tunnel where some of the most violent confrontations between rioters and law enforcement took place. During the hours-long barricade, Miller, 33, a youngster, he was just a kid, struck officers with metal and wooden poles, threw objects at them, and ripped a riot shield away, handing it off to another protester before slipping into the crowd. Miller pleaded guilty in January to a felony charge of assaulting, resisting, or impeding certain officers using a dangerous weapon. It's a very convoluted charge. Based on sentencing guidelines, Miller faced 57 to 71 months in prison, with prosecutors advocating for the highest possibility and the defense, of course, seeking no more than 2 years. So I hate when it comes in terms of months, and it's not immediately obvious to me, but 71 months is, I've got it backwards here. 71 months divided by 12 is 5.916 years. So if you got 5.5 out of the possible 5.9, that's a pretty strong sentence. I'll agree. All right. Here embedded is the order. We don't need to read through that. Though Miller and his attorney, Assistant Federal Public Defender Elizabeth Mullen, attempted to argue he had not planned to go to the Capitol, doing so at the last minute to join the energy of the day, Chutkan said he went to Washington specifically to join the fray. I guess the jury thinks so. Referring to the tunnel, the judge told Miller, "You went straight there, and the whole time you were fighting." Miller's conduct before, during, and after the attack was described by Chutkan, Mullen, prosecutors, and even his wife as both disgusting and shocking. In a sentencing memorandum, Miller said he joined the fascist group, that's how they're referring to the Proud Boys, why not, while looking for a community. And during his time in the ranks, he spoke repeatedly of violence and collected Nazi memorabilia, as well as a library of internet memes displaying, among other racial attacks, hatred toward Jews and a solution to their very presence. Prosecutors said on January 6, 2021, the Proud Boys also shared a text chain, a list of Jewish-owned stores in Washington, D.C., showing a direct line between Miller's belief and his violence. That's fantastic. We really dodged a bullet in that one. Imagine after having conquered the Capitol if they had begun to execute judgment on Jewish-owned stores in Washington, D.C. Wow. I mean, we all thought we were perilously close to the edge of losing our democracy that day. But as it turns out, we were, I guess, perilously close to Kristallnacht that day as well. I don't think we knew that prior to this, at least I didn't. Mullen attempted to explain Miller's extremism, demonstrated the dangers of groupthink, and said his 2021 departure from the Proud Boys, as well as his active involvement in church, shows he continues to evolve. Well, he can evolve in jail. That's fine. However, reflecting on the exhibits submitted by the government, including one meme in which a character proclaimed all children would have to be killed before he would support gun control, Chutkan said she was skeptical someone with such fanatical beliefs could transform so quickly. They don't just arrive there by some random algorithm, the judge said. Chutkan, who was appointed to the district bench in 2013 by President Barack Obama, is also overseeing former President Donald Trump's election interference case, that's the way they put it, brought by the Department of Justice following the insurrection. Whereas a jury was chosen this week for Trump's hush money trial in New York, now underway, right? A start date for his prosecution in Washington has been stalled until what? Until the Supreme Court decides whether the former president has absolute immunity from his charges. Arguments in that case are expected to be heard Thursday, not Wednesday. Maybe it's been bumped up to Wednesday, I don't know. And a decision will likely be made by the end of June. Whether the Supreme Court allows Trump's interference case to continue, Chutkan has demonstrated her belief that the January 6th attacks ought to be handled with severity in court, as such an event, she warned, could happen again. And in fact, they're dying to try it again. Extremism is alive and well in this country, Chutkan said. While prosecutors relayed example after example of Miller's bigotry and backwards ideology, including a photo of the defendant smiling next to a news story describing the drowning of migrants. He's a real pleasure to deal with, I'm sure. Mullen said her client began distancing himself gradually from the Proud Boys and his extremism as early as February 2021, a month after he went to Washington. Okay. A month after he went to Washington for what? February 2021? Oh, I see. Okay. A month after he went to Washington. You mean a month after he assaulted police officers viciously? Mullen also pointed to other actions Miller made that day as reasons for a lower sentence, and I guess she didn't win. His decision to go to the Capitol, she argued, was made with minimal planning, a point Chutkan ultimately dismissed, referring to the tactical gear and goggles that Miller wore during the raid. That would argue against that, wouldn't you think? Although, I guess you could also say, well, but Proud Boys, wear that stuff all the time. Okay, but why? Well, because they plan to engage in violence. But still, the point is something else, I guess. All right. Additionally, Mullen said Miller did everything he could to help resuscitate Roseanne Boyland, one of 4 people who died during the attack, in an effort, she said, spoke to the former EMT's true character. But of course, she was there as a rioter, so I'm not certain that it was all that helpful. I'll resuscitate this person so that I have another pair of fists to beat cops with. Anyway, he had an impulse to help somebody that day, Mullen said. An impulse he still has. Mullen and Miller's wife also told the judge that the impending arrival of his firstborn baby also forced Miller to reconsider his priorities and challenge his beliefs. But of course, he should have been in jail and not able to conceive that child the whole time anyway. Miller himself apologized for his actions at the Capitol, addressing the Metropolitan Police officer who attended Friday's hearing and told the judge he is reforming himself. Kid, have you reformed yourself? It's rehabilitated, but I recognize now that the line of thinking leads people down a bad path now that I'm on trial. Chutkan acknowledged that Miller missing the birth of his child was a harsh punishment for him, his wife, and his baby, who didn't ask for any of this, to endure. But she told him, you have the opportunity to show your family and community that people can change. You're the one who said it. Now show him. The judge recommended Miller serve his time in the Federal Correction Institution Schuylkill in Pennsylvania. That's a weird way of saying it. Why not the Schuylkill Federal Correction Institution in Pennsylvania, the closest prison to where his wife is staying. He will also have to pay $2,000 in restitution. Could have gone into the baby's college fund, but now it won't. Chutkan spoke skeptically and sternly to the defendant, saying she believes he was an active participant in the January 6th attack, swayed not by the momentum of a crowd, but by his own desire to fight. Considering her sentence, she referenced Miller's 2019 arrest in Anne Arundel County after disrupting a drag queen story time at the Severna Park Community Library. In other words, a recidivist and a repeat troublemaker. The case was later placed on the STET, or inactive docket, and was eventually expunged from state records. Why? Without either a report or a conviction, Chutkan said she was still disturbed by the behavioral pattern shown between 2019 and January 6, 2021. I see from your actions that you have a tendency to jump in and cause trouble, she said, and expressed her hope that the love of his family would steer him in a different direction. And now you've got 5.5 years to contemplate that and think about how you will react to it. Okay, so good news. It was nice to see, someone finding out at last. It's been a long time coming, and a good update on what Judge Chutkan is up to while she's waiting for instruction from the Supreme Court. All right. There's much, much more, of course. However, we are coming to the end of our time together. And let's see. Anything else that we can add before we hand things over to Justice Putnam for the day? Oh, well, I just, here I uncovered a tweet and a New York Times piece that I guess backs up what we were saying earlier about the way the House Republicans were voting. I happen to have this one here. Who's this? Gennady Rudkovich. Have I pronounced any of those names correctly? Saying via Blue Sky, this is the second article in 2 days in which the New York Times attempts to paint opposition to the Ukraine aid as a fringe movement, but in fact, a majority of the Gop voted against the aid. An excellent point that I wanted to make, whether or not we share the article that's connected to it, unimportant because the main point has been made here. It's weird, and once again, the New York Times is like providing some odd, distortive cover for Republicans, painting opposition to Ukraine aid as a fringe position when it is not. So, interesting. And that, by the way, the article that he was referencing, just so you have it available here, necessity gives rise to bipartisanship. For now, the far right finds itself marginalized in the House as Speaker Johnson pushes through aid to Ukraine and Israel by relying on Democrats. It is interesting that once again, this is not the headline that Democrats get the credit for this, but rather somehow bipartisanship. Even if you're not going to award the credit to Republicans, why award it to bipartisanship as opposed to Democrats forcing the hand of moderate Republicans to push aside the people who are, they're not fringe, though. That's the whole point. That's a very interesting point that he's making here. The vast, I can't say the vast majority, but the absolute majority of House Republicans were in agreement with that position. It's not a fringe thing. It is fringe in the Democratic caucus. None of the people were willing to stand on that position. So, very interesting, and just good backup for the claim made earlier, and a good reminder that the New York Times does tend to screw things up this way, but I think you all really know that. All right, time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for his Monday episode of the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we'll try and sneak in a couple mentions of what he's got on tap right after this.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, of course, the Trump trial tops of the list. He'll face the witness he fears the most in his criminal trial, which, of course, would be Darth Vader in Yoda's cave. Also on the menu today, legal action to hollow out Brown versus Kansas Board of Education is moving at deliberate speed. Undoing Brown versus Board of Education, always been on their agenda.